All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to hear a little bit about our identity journey at McDonald's. My name is George Roberts, and I lead our identity and access engineering team at McDonald's. And our team builds, runs, maintains, and enhances the workforce identity platform at McDonald's, which is used by our workforce globally, which includes our CEO all the way down to our crew people in our restaurants. I named this talk One McDonald's Way because last year our CEO, Chris Kay, made an announcement that we were going to have this new program called Accelerating the Arches, and he said we're going to have one McDonald's way, and everybody was like, well, what does that mean? And basically what he meant by that was that we were going to try and take the best ideas, the best innovation, and the best products and services that have been developed all across the McDonald's system, and we're going to bring them into the center, and then we're going to deliver them globally. And I'll talk a little bit about the history of McDonald's and how it's operated a little bit later, and you'll understand why something like this is needed. Some of the work that we've done on our identity platform since I started in 2018 has really changed our identity story quite a bit. Even if we were a few years ahead of Chris Kay announcing One McDonald's Way, we've kind of been moving in that direction for the last 6 years. So the biggest challenge that we had in 2019, the majority of the McDonald's markets actually ran their own identity systems. We still had a global system, and those markets that ran their own identity would still go and provision some global IDs, but it was hit and miss, here or there, just for users who needed to access some global system. We had no way to guarantee that any particular user actually had a global ID, because their day-to-day work, when they logged into their PC, it was being done on a local identity system in the market. And the challenge with that was that our business was coming to us and saying, hey, we want to roll out these global programs. We want to roll out global training and development so we can have a consistent training experience across all of our markets, all the way down to the crew people in our restaurants. And we can't integrate with 100 different identity systems across the globe in order to be able to do that. So the global system in 2019 actually only contained about 35% of the total global workforce of McDonald's. When we went to go try and solve this problem, we actually used the business as our carrot. We said, okay, great. If you want to be able to have a global campus training system, help us roll out global identity. Tell them, well, you have to be on the global identity system in order to roll this out, and we'll use that as the carrot to get markets involved. And I mentioned before a little bit of context on why McDonald's was the way McDonald's was. Historically, McDonald's has always operated as a collection of businesses geographically. About 22 of our 115 markets are actually run by McDonald's. The rest of the markets are actually licensed to third-party companies. The brand is licensed, and the day-to-day operations, the decision-making around how McDonald's works in those markets is done by a third party. And so historically, they've had their own IT teams, they've had all of their own internal systems, and that worked for a really long time until it didn't, because the pace of change accelerated so much that we knew we needed to be able to start to push from the center out instead of letting everybody do their own thing. And this happens not only in identity, but in other areas. Our mobile application today is a different application in every market that we use. Some of it is based on the same system, but it's then taken and changed and modified for their use. Well, we're moving towards a true global platform where every market will be on the same application with the same features and capabilities, but will allow for the markets to be able to run and customize that without having to deploy a completely separate application. So To further complicate the matter, these markets that are run, by different licensees, and even the ones by McDonald's, often franchise their restaurants. So to give you an example, here in the United States, we have 14,000 restaurants. Over 95% of them are run by franchisees, which means that we have somewhere around 1,500 different franchise organizations here in the US, and all of the people that work in those restaurants are not employed by us, they're employed by the franchisees. But we have to be able to give them access to the same applications as the employees who work in the McDonald's owned restaurants. And in fact, the restaurants often will change hands. Sometimes they'll get bought and sold between franchisees. Sometimes they'll go between franchisee and McDonald's owned and back again. And so treating the users differently between those two different types of restaurants is just not a feasible solution, because you'd have users moving between systems all over the place. So needless to say, our identity estate is very complicated in terms of how we work within the McDonald's sort of organizational structure. What we needed to do when we decided that we were going to bring all of these markets on globally was we knew that we needed to have a cross-functional deployment team. We couldn't do this just with just with a few people within our identity team. So we actually brought in members from a bunch of different areas within McDonald's, including our application owners, who were going to be sort of piggybacking on our rollout to ensure that we were all in sync. We wanted to make sure that we understood what their deployment schedule was, what their priorities were, which markets they wanted to deploy to first, so that we could coordinate our schedule with theirs. We also knew that we needed to have a repeatable process. We couldn't do 100 different custom onboardings for 100 different markets. So we figured out, well, what is the process of taking a market off their own identity platform and onto ours? And we simplified it down to a set of checklists and forms, and then we figured out what the process needed to be, both externally working with the markets and internally. And then we turned that into an agile process where we had 6-week sprints, and we would, figure out how many sprint points a particular activity would be, and then we figured out what our capacity was, and we used that to just rinse and repeat every 6 weeks. We did the same thing for 4 years in a row, same thing over and over, and eventually we got there. You can see on the graph here, sort of the red is the number of markets that had their own identity platform, and then the yellow is the markets that were on the global platform. And you can just see, like, over the course of 4 years, how many markets we were onboarding, and we got from basically 20 on the global platform in 2019 to 120 by 2022. That took our user counts from 700,000 users in 2019 to over 2 million. It's actually close to 2.5 million today. And again, that's around 40,000 restaurants worldwide that we support users for. So what are some of the lessons that we learned? Number one, standardization is key, right? We like to say one McDonald's way. That doesn't mean that it's our way or the highway in terms of every single thing. We understand that there are cultural differences, there's regulatory differences, there's business process differences within our markets that we have to account for. And so we've tried to find the right balance of standardization with customization. But we can't be sort of writing code for every market that we onboard to the platform to do custom things. So we actually built a policy engine that we use to allow us to keep track of all of the different customizations that we have available, and then allow us to set those appropriately for each market. And as we onboarded the markets to the platform, we'd figure out with them what the right approach was, what the right settings were for their policies. And now whenever they send new user records to us, our policy engine basically tells our identity platform, all right, so this person is a crew person in, I don't know, Norway. And in Norway, their crew people they get put into this OU in Active Directory, and they have these features and these capabilities. Or this is a staff person in the US, and they get a corporate email box with 50 gig of storage and this Office license. And it allows us to have sort of a singular approach to how we handle the identity processing while still being able to afford a little bit of customization and capabilities within the different markets. Another big thing we learned was technical onboarding is really only the first step. Right? We had, early on, we had a few markets where we did all of the work to figure out what they needed to do to migrate their users off of their AD onto our AD, and we got everything set up. We migrated them over and we moved them, and then we were like, okay, great. So, how's that going? And they're like, well, yeah, they're still kind of using some of the old stuff because we haven't really let everybody know yet what that we've migrated. And so we realized early on that we needed to make sure that we worked with our markets to update the business processes, the support processes, knowledge bases for their IT support, documentation, and then also finally the organizational change management, being able to provide standard communication templates for them to use so that we know that what's being communicated out to their users is the right thing and not letting them do their own thing, because it's almost like a game of telephone. If you don't do that, at the end of the day, you're like, well, wait, but we told you these things, and every market thinks it's something just a little bit different because how they translated that communication was a little different than what we expected. So now that we have all of our markets onto our identity platform, what's next? When we decided to move all of the markets onto a global platform, we had a couple of choices. One was we could modernize our platform, our global platform first, and then onboard all of the markets. Or we could onboard the markets to what was admittedly not old but not modern platform first, get everybody on the platform, and then basically lift everybody up all at once. We chose the latter mainly because we felt it would be too complicated for us to try and, we looked at all of the markets and looked at sort of where they were at in their identity stack, and they were relatively close to where the global stack was. And if we upgraded the global stack, then we would have to effectively upgrade, not only onboard, but upgrade 100 markets at the same time. So we figured it would be easier for us to onboard them first and then upgrade everybody. So now we're on to sort of phase 2, which is modernizing our platform. First step is we're in the process of migrating hundreds of applications from ADFS to Entra IDS. So this is a huge piece of work for us. We had over 1,000 applications, I think, on ADFS, and they're all like special little snowflakes in terms of how their claims are set up and where we source their claims from and things like that. So we're well onto this process. All of our new applications are now only going on to Entra. We're not putting any new applications on ADFS anymore. And I think we're like 150 applications in to the migration. So we think we're going to be done, I think, in the next year or year and a half on that project. The next thing we're doing is we're modernizing our IGA processes. One of the things that we're looking at right now, our processes are very batch driven. So, every few minutes, some process goes and looks to see if there's something new for it to do, and then the output of that gets put into a queue where some other batch process comes along a few minutes later and looks at that. And by the time you get through all of the various different processes, it's like an hour and a half before the whole identity onboarding process is done. We're looking to upgrade that to be event-driven and we think we can get our onboarding. Our typical provisioning process is anywhere between an hour and a half and 3 hours, and we think we can get it down to 10 minutes. So that's really kind of our goal. I don't know how ambitious we're being on that, but at this point, it's really funny. There was a huge shift. For the longest time, nobody really cared how long it took for identities to get created, because it was sort of like, they'll get their ID, they'll get their app access when they get it, and then they'll get started. And then all of a sudden, there was this shift in mindset in our digital journey where everything was digitally driven, and now it was like, wait, why does it take hours for IDs to get created? And it used to be like, we over the last 6 years, we dropped our provisioning time from roughly like 18 to 24 hours down to 3 hours. And everybody was like, well, that's just not fast enough. And we're like, but wait, it was 18 to 24 before, and we like dropped it down. So, needless to say, we're rolling with the punches, and we're going to try and deliver on what it is they're looking for. But ultimately, though, we really don't want to stick with the batch processes anyway, because what happens a lot of times is we'll have a lot of requests come in all at once, and those batch processes last even longer, because not only is it the cycle of how often they go, but then each step in the process takes a long time because you've got a lot of different events coming in. So next thing we're looking to do is reduce reliance on our on-premise directory services. Today we are 100% reliant on our on-premise Active Directory for all 2.5 million users. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 550 domain controllers worldwide, and it's a big pain in the butt to manage them all. We have a lot of our users really are in AD mainly because we're using ADFS, and that's what it authenticates against, right? But they don't use any of our on-premise applications. All they're using is web applications. So once we get off of ADFS and on to Enter ID, they don't need to be in on-premise anymore. So we think we can get a large population of our users off of on-premise and just be cloud only, and that will hopefully allow us to reduce our footprint. I mean, ultimately, long-term, we'd like to get off of on-premise AD altogether, but we're kind of big and a kind of a dinosaur, so it's going to take us a little while to get there. And the last thing, obviously we're on, just like everybody else, a zero trust journey. I mean, I know it's kind of a marketing buzzword, but as we build and enhance a platform, we're trying to keep in mind that is our target. Is we want to get to a posture of only having real-time access, just-in-time access for privilege access, and am I going to say, hey, we're going to get to zero trust in the next couple of years? No, but as a philosophy, whenever we're putting new things in, that's the approach that we're looking to take, because we don't want to dig ourselves a hole any more than we already are. And so, of course, as we enhance the platform, we'll sort of bite off a chunk here and there and get us into a better posture as we upgrade. So I put this on here as a burning question. We have a solution for this in-house. It's just not one I necessarily am particularly pleased with. But I'm really curious, from a sort of an industry perspective, how do you enable MFA for frontline workers when you have a whole bunch of people in your frontline that you have super high turnover? You can't guarantee that they have any particular type of technology. You don't even know if they have an old school phone, let alone a smartphone. And even if they did, you can't require them to use it for work purposes anyway, because it's their personal device. So, the big mantra is MFA everything, which is great. I totally agree with that. But how do you do that when you don't know what those users can support? So I'll tell you what we've done at this point, and you'll understand why I say it's not the greatest solution in the world. We built a number of years ago basically a paper-based MFA solution. Our managers in our restaurants can print out a sheet for each of their crew people with a bunch of one-time codes. And when they go to some type of an endpoint that requires MFA, they get prompted for, give me the code from line 13. And they put in the 6-digit code from line 13, and there they go, away they go. It is MFA. Is it as secure as traditional MFA? Absolutely not. But our crew people the risk level is not as high for them either. So even though the security level of this particular method is not as high, we felt it was fairly appropriate. But there's also a lot of downsides. They fold it up, put it in their pocket, it gets washed. Oh, now I got to go back and get another one. They probably don't have to access things that require MFA all that frequently. And so they get it, and then they bring it home, and they throw it in a drawer someplace, and then the time when they need it, they don't have it with them. So then they got to go to their manager, and their manager's got to print them out another one instead of actually running our restaurants. So I will leave you with this question. I would love to hear from anybody if you have any thoughts or if you've solved this, what your approach would be for this. And I just saw a sign that I have 5 minutes. So I do have a few minutes here for questions if anybody has any. Otherwise, QR code just goes to that same LinkedIn address. That's my LinkedIn if you want to connect with me. And otherwise, I appreciate you all coming. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. So our consumer accounts are actually run by our digital team. Our solution is actually a homegrown solution that our digital team built. My team is responsible for not only the workforce management, from an engineering perspective, but we also have responsibility for our overall standards and processes. So our digital team kind of looks to our standards to make sure that they're in line with them, but they really kind of run that on a day-to-day themselves. Any other?
I have one question in 2 parts with a comment in the middle.
Sure.
So my first is, I'm just curious, what is the authentication when the manager prints out the super high-tech sheet of 2 of them?
Yeah, we have a custom web portal that we've built that does a lot of our IGA functions specifically focused on our restaurant folks because, again, we have thousands of restaurant organizations, franchisee organizations, and we needed to build something custom for them because they don't have the time to try and navigate some enterprise solution. So the manager would log into that portal, which they're prompted by MFA in order to access the portal, and they can then go look through the users that are in their restaurant or search, find that user, and then just basically walk through a process to print that out.
Got it. Time for the comment, which might be the group's favorite. I'm in the front so I can see it. I went through my closet and I brought what I thought was a great loafer to the trade show. This gentleman, is Ronald McDonald okay?
Yeah. Yeah, so I was here at Identiverse last year, and Savient was running a giveaway at their booth, and it was for like custom Nikes. So I happened to win it. So I made some McDonald's colored custom Nikes. So thank you.
And then I thought I would take a shot at trying to answer your question. How else might you authenticate high turnover?
Yeah.
So I do represent a company. We're deep into specifically we validate over 10,000 government issued ID types.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly novel concepts. You must have an opinion, but we do that across more than 200 countries. So I don't know. We've got a lot of teenagers. Maybe they don't have that government ID, but maybe that knocks out wide swaths of the friction.
Yeah, so the challenge really is there's a bunch of different scenarios that we have to deal with. Sometimes they're accessing sites or tools within our restaurant on like a shared device that is provided by the restaurant. Sometimes they're on their own personal device, whether that's a phone, whether that's a home computer. Sometimes they're on a shared device at home. There's just all these different scenarios that we have a challenge trying to support them all in a standard way.
Yeah, sorry, I left that piece out. I was thinking there must be at least one camera to read somewhere in the restaurant.
One would think so, but that's not necessarily the case. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm happy to talk with anybody afterwards if you like as well. So, well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.